Today's case is one of the most talked about cases in South Korea right now, and this man is in the center of today's case. And this case goes a lot dark and deeper than I could have ever imagined. And it's the first time in 40-something years when the victims of this massacre got an official apology. And hopefully it can also inspire others to do the same, to come forward and apologize from one of a country's darkest event and try to heal a nation. And if you love K-pop and Korean culture, I do think this is also a very important case to know and learn. And my notes are so long, you guys. This took me days to research. So just a like in this video, sharing with your friends who love history and Korean culture, leaving your comments about your thoughts, and of course subscribing really all helps me to continue growing and sharing these stories with you guys. So to understand the most talked about man in South Korea right now, we do have to dive into the important history. And the history of today's case is actually very long and complicated, so I'm going to be summarizing it in my video so that it's easier to understand. The Civil War ended in 1953. This was obviously a war between North and the South, and South wanted to follow in the steps of democracy. So following the footsteps of democracy system like America, South Korea also decided to elect presidents. Fast forward to 1963 to 1979. The president was Park Chung-hee, whom is actually the father of a controversial president in South Korea most recently, Park Geun-hye. That's a whole nother story, and in October 26, 1979, President Park Chung-hee would be assassinated. Although South Korea did become independent and separate from North Korea, ironically, that was not the end of problems and dictatorship, and South Korea itself had a lot of military, forceful rules. And Park himself, the assassinated president, was also known to be like a dictator. A lot of people opposed to this, and Park himself was a president for 16 years. One person having that much power for that long, it doesn't really seem like a democracy. So as the South Korean president was assassinated, South Korea decided to go into martial law. Martial law is a temporary substitution of military authority for civilian rule. So to investigate this whole assassination, the Joint Investigation Headquarters came to take charge in the investigation of the president's death. And the leader of this headquarters was a man named Chun Doo Hwan. He was also the security commander, and this was all part of the military system. But apparently within the military, there was also a secret organization, a private organization that was made up with the most powerful or recognized men within the military system. And they were considered like the elites of the military. And Chun Doo Hwan himself was also the head leader of this organization. Waiting for the perfect timing, Chun and his elites were set to organize a coup d'etat in order to take control of the government. A coup d'etat is when you try to overtake the government suddenly, forcefully, and violently. And on December 12, 1979, there was a military coup d'etat that erupted with the invasion of downtown Seoul, involving this crazy fight within the government and the military. And without the president's approval, Chun and the military would act on their own. The president is supposed to have the executive powers and control over the military. So again, in a summary, the citizens of South Korea were tired of this dictatorship. They wanted democracy finally. They were also tired of martial law, having like soldiers out on the streets trying to like control everybody. And eventually Chun and the elite's plan was to completely declare martial law throughout the entire country. So the D-Day of this plan to completely utilize the martial law in the whole entire country and take over was May 17th. And the main plan to get citizens to abide by this plan was, number one, he met up with like the biggest media companies in South Korea, like NBC, KBS. And basically, according to them, like Chun met with them and threatened them that they must report whatever he was telling them to report to everybody in South Korea. And obviously back then, the way to get news about what's going on was the TV or radio or the newspaper. And when you have media control, this is powerful because this is how you really control a large group of people, like a whole country. You get everybody to abide because you think that that's what everybody is thinking of. And second, of course, he knew that there was going to be more protests and people who did not want to abide, and outrage and uproar. So in order to control that, Chun ordered the special forces of South Korea to be trained for civilian Korean subjugation. So anyone that was to protest and have an outrage, you were going to be punished. So on May 17th, 1980, the spokesman of the Blue House, which is the Korean version of White House, declared an official implement of martial law across the country. When a martial law is implemented, this could be very scary because all political activities are stopped, all universities are closed, protests are not allowed, no formation of any assembly or groups are allowed, and mass censorships on media. And this did work. Most of South Korea complied. But one province, or one state of South Korea that did not want to comply and were like, hell no, this is not happening. We are not going to abide by a dictatorship and military. They wanted to fight back, and that was the province of Gwangju, which is south of Seoul. And this is where we enter the infamous dark history of South Korea, the May 18th incident. So thousands of people came to protest the people of Gwangju state. Again, time before social media, if the media is controlled, you don't even know what's going on in other provinces. So the first round was when soldiers would attack these protesters with their forceful weapons, kind of look like a club or a bat. And anyone that stood in the way were beaten. And they would just take all these people, put them in their trucks, and take them to these facilities where many would just bleed to death. Many were tortured. And still to this day, there's many people who are reported missing, never having their bodies found. So they believe that these soldiers even mass buried bodies where they're not even found till this day. If you were a woman, again, there were a lot of college students. They were rounded up, taken to undisclosed areas where women were assaulted and murdered. But the people of Gwangju did not give up. They're pro-democracy, and all of this actually made them even more angry. And I just want to remind you guys, this is within South Koreans versus South Koreans. This is not even a war against different countries. This is your own people doing this to your own people. Gwangju people got even more angry, and they got buses and used their cars to protest. Now it's May 21st, and the soldiers apparently got an order to now use ammunitions. Again, another mass protest erupted, and this was a day that a lot of people suffered. People protested outside the main building or office of where the military officials were stationed, and this is a famous scene from movies where people were singing national anthem in front of this building. And it's reported that as soon as the national anthem ended, the soldiers started to mass shoot at these civilians. There were soldiers on top of buildings and shooting at anyone running away. And even helicopters were used to shoot at civilians and inside of any buildings that they saw people in. The mass protests in Gwangju lasted for about 10 days. It ended on May 27th, which is my birthday. This is so weird. And the media reported this incident as a disgraced rebel by the mobs, making these innocent people who just stood up for what they believed in, framing them as evil mobs. And ever since then, Gwangju city and citizens were looked down upon. So people in power at the time were trying to twist history, trying to twist the truth of what actually happened. This was considered a success at the time. Due to this massacre, they believe over 550 people died, with many missing, never being found, and over 1,000 people who were victims of unlawful incarceration and torture. And Chun would become the next president of South Korea, and he would be in power for the next 7 years. And during his presidency, there was also a lot of abuse allegations, concentration camps to re-educate people who were against his ideas, a lot of things. And it was only in 1988, as people found out about the truth of what happened, and an official investigation started to get to the bottom of Gwangju massacre. Fast forward 1995, Chun was indicted for fraud and his involvement in the Gwangju massacre and coup d'etat charges. And during the investigation, interrogation, until his passing in 2021, he denied any involvement. He denied that he was the one who gave the green light to use helicopters, to give ammunitions, and the green light to say, hey, just kill anybody, kill all our people who are protesting. And back then in 1995, he was sentenced to life in prison. And only 2 years into his sentence, he was pardoned by the president of South Korea then in 1997. So he did become a free man. And more recently, he was charged with treason and bribery and was ordered to pay millions of dollars. Which to that, he said he only had about like $200 left to his name and at his bank, and he had nothing to pay. So he ended up passing away in 2021 at age of 90 without paying back anything. That was a big history, I know, and that was just a summary of it. This is where we enter the most talked about man in South Korea right now, Jeon Woo Won. So now one story all happened when he was on YouTube Live, and he claimed that he was the grandson of former ex-president Chun Doo Hwan. He is 27 years old, living in New York for his studies, and I believe he was living there ever since he was like a teenager. And indeed, he was the grandson of Chun Doo Hwan from his father, who is a second son of Chun. And Won came to be from his father's second marriage. And from his father's second marriage, Won was born and his older brother. And his father actually got divorced and married a third woman, has more kids with them. And the part where Won really blew up with his story was that in these YouTube lives, he did have a lot of erotic behaviors while talking about his family and how his family is criminal. They have black money. His father cheated on his mother multiple times and caused her a lot of heartbreak in the family.
보여드리도록 하겠습니다. 죽지만 않았으면 좋겠어요. 이거 하고.
How his own father abandoned him and his brother since he was young, and he was like not really present in his life. He exposed that he was living a luxury life in America all his life through his family's black money. He also said that his family brainwashed him or made him believe that the Gwangju massacre was not how the media now portrayed it to be, that it was not his grandfather's fault. And again, it was that original story of the mobs, and he wasn't involved, and that he himself is the only one in the family who seems to realize this and the truth, and that he wanted to pay respect and ask for forgiveness from the Gwangju victim. Overall, saying that he is sorry for his grandfather's actions. Now, Won claims that he personally realized the truth as he was studying abroad, and his roommate or his friends talked about his family and said, hey, I do think that what you were being told by your own family was wrong. And that's when he started to realize what his grandfather really did, and so on. So in one of the earlier live videos, he was showing symptoms of a bad trip, anxiety. Someone reported it to the police. Police actually came to his house. He was taken to the hospital. Apparently, he almost died and he woke up again. I mean, it's a crazy story. And ever since then, Won has been posting on social media exposing his family. More about his uncles and his, relatives having like businesses overseas, money laundering. Biggest claim that Won said was that as he was growing up in his grandfather's mansion in South Korea, which he was the grandson of a ex-president / dictator, so he grew up as the elite, right? He says that at their grandparents' mansion, they had this like money vault, like you would see in like at a bank or like a movie. And behind this vault, he says that there were stacks and stacks of cash, like you couldn't even imagine. He grew up with maids and bodyguards and, private chefs and like that elite lifestyle. And this is a kid now just like exposing the entire thing. And the whole issue about money in his family obviously became controversial because ex-president Chun Doo Hwan died, saying that he had no money left to his name. And now Won is claiming that, obviously there is a lot of shady things going on with his family. And if you're a South Korean citizen, even if you're living abroad somewhere else and drugs are legal there, you're still not allowed to participate in that. And once he got out of the hospital, he made another, I believe, Instagram video saying that he will be going back to South Korea to cleanse his own sins and his relation to his grandfather and what he has done. And so Won did eventually return to South Korea voluntarily. He was arrested at the airport to be interrogated by the drug team in South Korea. But as he returned to South Korea, people were rooting for him. They were meeting him with positive reactions. So he did get investigated. He was released until his court date when it's forwarded to prosecution and things like that. So Won really did go to Gwangju to the victims' memorials, and on behalf of his grandfather, he apologized and sought forgiveness. He would say, quote, "I can see my sins here. all I can say is sorry. He's seen wiping the gravestones of the victims with his clothing, a sign of respect and asking for forgiveness. Some of the victims' family that met Won hugged him. They thanked him for being brave to apologize on behalf of his grandfather. And one of the family here is saying, "Thank you, hug me like you're my son who passed away." One mother who lost her son said, "Instead of trying to prosecute the criminals, if they ask for forgiveness, I think I can forgive them." I mean, you are a family standing in front of the grandson of the man who ordered to kill your innocent loved one. I mean, they could have cursed at him. They could have thrown rocks at him and eggs at him. It was so moving to hear this mother 40 years later say, I can forgive you. Yes, it wasn't Won himself who has done this, obviously, but he felt as if being part of the lineage, he felt responsible to pay the respect forward. And this is the closest thing that the victims are gonna get to an apology directly from Chun Doo Hwan's family. Now, although the public's response is very positive, they're applauding for what he's doing right now, but Won's family, so his father and his older brother, claims that Won is not mentally stable and that he's acting this way because of his depression and ADHD. And there were some erotic behaviors by Won, but he explains in this interview that he did not receive love from his father, that it seemed like he feels like his father abandoned them and left their mother for another woman. So it seems like this is a man with a lot of his bitterness toward his father that he just wanted love from. He also does say that his safety is in danger and he doesn't know what's going to happen to him or what his family is going to do to him by exposing all of this. So at this point, it is pretty much like a war now between Won and his family. He said in one of the live videos that his father is not picking up his calls, or pretty much all his family minus his mother is ignoring him. And whenever Won is talking about his father in interviews, he always refers to him as his name and not calling him 아버지, which in Korea you call your father father, not their name. And he claims that he cannot call his father because he doesn't seem like a father to him. He never really was that father figure to him, so he calls him by almost like an acquaintance, you just call him by his name, which was kind of sad. Won right now is acting independent, doing whatever interviews and kind of just talking about his family with no censorship. So I don't know if that's gonna be good for him and his safety. I guess I'll keep you guys updated to see what happens. At the end of the day, the Gwangju victims being able to meet Won was a big thing for them. And it is an example of how even throughout dark history, there's people out there, victims, who are willing to forgive and say thank you for asking for forgiveness. Let me know what you guys have thought about today's story. Comment down below and see you guys in my next video.